Welcome everybody to Katala. Today we're going to be looking at powers and roots. So our learning objectives. Firstly, we're going to be looking at how to square and square root numbers before looking at how to cube and cube root numbers. So starting off with squaring and square roots. So to square a number, we multiply the number by itself. So for example, 3 squared is 3 multiplied by 3, which would be 9. And in red here, we've got a little bit of information on the official notation. So this here is the official notation for how we say, mathematically speaking, 3 squared, otherwise known as 3 to the power of 2. So we'd say 3 squared is equal to 3 times 3, which would be 9. And it's always nice in maths once you know how to do one operation. So if we learn how to do addition, we then learn how to do subtraction. And once we learn how to do multiplication, we need to learn how to get back again. So we learn division. Similarly, for squaring, we have its counterpart, which would be square rooting. So it says here, the opposite of squaring a number is taking the square root. For example, the square root of 9 is 3. Since we know that 3 squared is equal to 9, then the square root of 9 takes us back to 3. And the official notation for the square root of 9, you can see here, square root of 9. So the square root of 9 we know to be 3. And that's just some information to give you an idea of what's going on in terms of squaring and square rooting. So I personally think it's a good idea to know the first 10, what we call square numbers. Now the square numbers we can find out just by squaring the first 10 positive whole numbers. So 1 all the way up to 10. So 1 squared is just 1 times 1, which would be 1. 2 squared is 2 times 2, which is 4. 3 squared would be 9. 4 squared is 16. And you will begin to recognise these numbers all the way up. If you don't for now, that's absolutely fine. You can just think about your times tables. 8 times 8, 64. 9 times 9, 81, and so on. And I do recommend that you know the first 10, or have a knowledge at least of the first 10, what we call square numbers here in blue. So, question number 1, and we're going to leave those square numbers in sight for this one, says, explain why the square root of 55 is between 7 and 8. So, looking at our table, we can see that 55 would lie somewhere in the middle of 49 and 64. So, these two square numbers here. And so, we would say, well, the square root of 49 is equal to 7, because we know that 7 squared is 49. And the square root of 64, which is bigger than 55, is equal to 8. So if the square root of 49 is 7 and the square root of 64 is 8, then the square root of 55 must lie somewhere between 7 and 8. Therefore, the square root of 55 is between 7 and 8. Okay. Question 2, find the square of 12. The square of this is just included because the square of 12 is the same as saying find 12 squared. And 12 squared is just 12 times 12, which is 144. So the square of is the same as saying squared. Find minus 2 squared. So the brackets here just mean that you're squaring the whole thing. So you're squaring the whole of minus 2. Now, minus 2 squared would be minus 2 times by itself, so minus 2 times minus 2, which would become, well, a negative times a negative number becomes a positive, and 2 times 2 is 4. So you can see when we square a negative number, it actually just becomes positive. Part B, 10 squared times 5. Well, 10 squared, using big maths, we're going to have to focus on that first. 10 squared is just 100 times by 5. Which is equal to, well, 100 times 5 is 500. The square root of 9c squared. These ones, there's a little bit more to it. All you've got to do is square root the number and square root the letters one at a time. So the square root of 9, taking the square root of 9 first, would just be 3. And then the square root of c squared, remember, is just going to be c. Since we squared c in the first place to end up with c squared, the square root of c squared will just put you back to c. So the square root of 9c squared is just 3c. And we can see that if we were to do 3c times 3c, so times them by itself, you would get back to 9c squared. cubing and cube roots. So the next step up really is cubing and cube roots. So beforehand, when we're talking about squaring, we're essentially putting a number to a power of 2. It's raised to a power of 2. And next up here, cubing and cube roots, we're essentially putting it to a power of 3. So let's see how that works. So to cube a number, we multiply 3 lots of the number together. For example, 2 cubed is 2 times 2 times 2. So you can see you've got 1, 2, 3 lots of 2 all timesing together, which would give you 8. So we would say that 2 cubed is 8. And similar notation here, but instead of putting it to the power of 2 for squaring, we put it to the power of 3. And so the official notation for 2 cubed would be 2 to the power of 3, as you can see there. And we'd say 2 cubed is 2 times 2 times 2, which is equal to 8. And again, this has its counterpart, its opposite if you like, and that is called cube rooting. So we know how to cube. To get back, we take the cube root here. So it says the opposite of cubing a number is taking the cube root. For example, the cube root of 8 we know is 2. Just by looking at the previous example, we know that 2 cubed is 8, so the cube root of 8 gets you back to 2. And the official notation for the cube root, you can see down here. So the official notation for the cube root of 8 is that piece of notation there. So we'd say that the cube root of 8 is equal to 2. It's a lot like a square root sign, just with a little mini 3 above the beginning of the sign. So I recommend knowing, again, we don't need to do all the way up to 10 cubes, so that's going to get quite large quite quickly. Going up to 5 is going to be enough for us. So 1 cubed, remember, it's just going to be 1 times 1 times 1, which would be 1. 2 cubed, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. 3 cubed is 27. 4 cubed is going to be 64. And 5 cubed is going to be 125. And again, especially for topics like indices, it's going to be really important that you have a good knowledge of your cube numbers and your square numbers from before. So find the cube of 10. Well, similarly to finding the square of, okay, finding the cube of is just the same as saying 10 cubed. So 10 cubed is 10 times 10 times 10, which would be 1000. 1 with 3 zeros. Find negative 2 cubed. Now negative 2 cubed is just going to be minus 2 times minus 2 times minus 2. And that's going to be, well, let's do the first two first. Let's times these two together. So minus 2 times minus 2 is going to be positive 4. So you're going to have positive 4 times minus 2. And 4 times minus 2 is equal to minus 4 times 2 is 8. So you can see when we cube a negative number, it actually stays negative. Remember beforehand, when we squared a negative number, it turned positive. Well, this time when we cube a negative number, it stays negative. Lastly, the cube root of 64p cubed. We do a very similar technique to similar question for square rooting in the previous section. We're just going to have to cube root the 64 and cube root p cubed. Now, the cube root of 64 is just 4. And the cube root of p cubed is just p. And that would be your answer for that one there. Okay, so we've managed to look at how to square root and square a number, and also how to cube and cube root a number. Thanks a lot for watching. Take care. Thanks again for watching. For more great resources to help build your confidence and ace your exams, feel free to head over to www.katala.co.uk, where you can sign up for free today. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and if you have any questions or suggestions, just comment down below. Thank you.